voice-based virtual assistants are becoming a feature of our everyday technoscape. This has led to many initiatives on developing large natural data sets or training these virtual assistants. Many are starting to rely on the power of crowdsourcing for developing and translating these data sets. There are many benefits to this process. For example, more natural sounding sentences and commands in conversational structures. However, they can also be more biased, especially with respect to gender. Much of the work that has looked at biases has focused on three main issues: stereotypes in how ideas about gender are represented in the training sets and the examples, and even how the virtual assistants are designed to interact. Toxicity in the sense of negative, harmful, and simply foul language embedded in these data sets. And finally, debiasing, ways in which we can use machine learning techniques to detect and remove sources of biases in these data sets. One form of gender-based bias that's virtually unexplored so far is about implicit biases in language, in particular masculine-centric language, in the word choices attributed to specific genders, as well as masculine as norm or masculine as default language. This led us to ask, do implicit masculine biases exist in these natural language processing datasets used to train virtual assistants or VAs, and to what extent? This idea of bias in language is a matter of feminist HCI, given that VAs continue to be taken up as a focus of study and by end users. We must also consider how these data sets and their biases exist in a larger ecology of systems and interactions. It is not clear whether and how crowdsourced efforts on NLP datasets take gender bias into account. For instance, the preprint about Massive, one of the datasets that we look at, does not discuss bias at all. This dataset was recently translated through crowdsourcing into 50 other languages. This could mean that biases from the original language and context could be embedded in the translated versions of the dataset. Biases could also be introduced on translation. We should especially recognize that many of the datasets are created in English first in what's called weird nations, Western, educated, industrial, rich, and democratic, particularly the US, and we could be translating these biases into other languages and cultural contexts. The focus of our work is to extend the gender bias literature by introducing implicit masculine biases. This is an umbrella term describing the tendency for societies to center men and masculinity. In essence, this reflects how social power operates through gender, whereby men and masculinity are positioned at the top of the social hierarchy. Masculine gendered language and word choice could be present in these big open NLP datasets. Just as a bit of a primer, NLP datasets are typically comprised of labeled data. For example, we might have a photo of a cat that has several labels attached to it describing what the photo is about. This combination of semantic text labels and the image can be used in training the algorithms used by virtual assistants. Most data sets are divided into three parts: train, which includes the collection of labeled data that explains the relationship between the labels and stimuli; dev, which is the data used after the algorithmic model has been trained in one cycle, just to check its progress; and test, which is a set of data that the algorithmic model has not experienced yet to evaluate whether or not it's learned what we want it to learn. In this research, we use two data sets, the Massive dataset and Redial. We use automated content analysis to analyze the relative presence of implicit gendered language. We use two dictionaries that were drawn from other contexts, one for job advertisements and one for the speech of political candidates in the US context. These were the only two dictionaries that we could find to look at implicit gendered language. What we found after doing our initial analyses was that these dictionaries did not account for certain features of the VA context. In the end, we decided to combine the dictionaries and expand upon what they offered by considering ambiguity in language for the virtual assistant context. We named this new dictionary AVA, Ambiguity for Virtual Assistants. By ambiguous terms, we mean terms that were deemed implicit gendered language that also relate to the VA context in gendered or gender-neutral ways. In developing the dictionary, we used critical discourse analysis. The three of us coded the data separately and then discussed any disagreements based on inter-rater reliability analyses. We included 44 terms. 0.23% of massive and 1.2% of redial represented implicit gendered language. However, after reconducting our analyses with the AVA dictionary, removing some of these words, we found that gendered language was still present, although significantly reduced, 0.08 for massive and 0.19% for redial. Looking at the distributions, we can see that there's still a masculine gendered language bias in both datasets, but this was particularly pronounced for massive. One of the key contributions of this first study was recognizing the potential disconnect between the dictionary context and the VA context. For instance, love was used mainly to indicate preference. Warm was almost exclusively used in the context of asking about the weather. Kind as well was almost exclusively used to mean type or variety. Next, we ran study 2, where we used the same procedures as in the first study, but used new dictionaries. Pronouns, marked words, and names, we consider them only as gender stimuli. Here are the results for massive. A slight masculine bias overall, but also quite a range of neutral and ambiguous terms. Now here are the results for redial. In comparison, there was a greater level of masculine biases present. Overall, we find an implicit cishet masculine bias. Massive contained more feminine words, but when we took a closer look, these words related to cisgendered heterosexual norms rather than expressions of femininity without a direct reference to masculinity. While we did find some masculine and feminine biases in the datasets, we saw a substantial pattern of gender neutrality and ambiguity. All of these patterns may reflect recent efforts to eliminate gender bias by targeting conspicuous patterns like pronouns and name use. Compared to the results of Study 1, we may have to take a turn toward looking at more implicit forms of gender bias. Our approach in Study 1 offers a first step towards this end. We can synthesize our results and offer suggestions for future work. We should start by interrogating the more subtle masculine centrism that our analyses of these databases have revealed. One challenge will be distinguishing between singular they/them pronouns and plural they/them pronouns. We should also be wary of implicit feminine language biases, which our results also pointed to. One of the key issues that we came across was managing disagreements among the dictionaries that we used. We should also consider how we wish to embed gender, not only as a feature of identity, but social roles and cultural values within these data sets. There could be immediate representational harms in how, say, women are described in the data sets and how then these are trained into virtual assistants. But there could also be more distant harms, such as the implicit masculine biases that we discovered, creating the impression of a masculine-centric world and perpetuating certain ways of communicating with language. We also have to consider that we're training virtual assistants not only to speak but to listen. Rather than removing some of the data, we may wish to partition it or label it differently to train for the ways that people could interact with these devices and thus how they might be able to respond in pro-social ways. We offer our AVA dictionary as a first step. We need to add more relevant terms and also test on larger data sets. We also suggest co-designing an expansion of the dataset with people who are genderqueer, non-binary, and trans, so as to better represent a greater diversity of gender identities for VAs to understand.